Hi, welcome back to Get Grounded's Mindful Marriage series. We've got Jeremiah with us today,
Hi.
and it's snowing out. We are expecting a snow day tomorrow, so there's chili on the stove, and we are completely ready. Today, I want to talk to you guys about owning your own stuff in the relationship. Not a bit fun, but it's super important that each person in the relationship is committed to owning their own stuff, because without it, no change. In our relationship in the beginning, I was the broken one. I was the one who came from a broken family. I was the one with the most unhealthy coping skills, and I was the one who reacted instead of responding. It's hard to admit, but it's absolutely necessary. I belittled, I threatened, and I used violent communication to prove that I was right, to get my point across, because everybody knows you get a medal for being right.
Of course.
Of course you do. So this is a good time to explain what violent communication actually is, because I think that most of us would not describe our communication as violent because it sounds so harsh, right? But if violence means acting in a way that results in harm, then when we communicate with moralistic judgments, with evaluations, criticisms, demands, coercion, and labels of right versus wrong, it's called violent communication. So many times we don't think about the impact that our words have on the people that we love. And speaking and thinking in these ways leads to a deep inner wound. It can lead to a lot of resentment, and you don't want to be on the receiving end of that resentment because it's hard to undo. I know that Jeremiah felt, well, tell us how you felt when I would behave in that way.
Well, I think when someone comes at you that way, you feel the need to just defend yourself, so you don't really communicate. And although I grew up in a home where, we were close, that didn't necessarily mean I had good communication skills that I was being taught or good coping skills. So, when we would argue, I just would push back, and then in the need to move forward with our relationship, I found myself just kind of giving in for the most part. And that's when we talked about the fact that I felt like I was becoming a yes man.
Yeah, and the person being aggressive in their communication, whether he had good communication skills or not, I'm the one being aggressive. So I'm the one creating these deep inner wounds. And kind of what I wanted was for him to give in. I thought that's what I wanted. But that's exactly how I communicated when I would feel defensive or was right fighting. And clearly those are unhealthy coping skills, but I had no idea because I was a part of a cycle. That's how I watched conflict resolution occurring in my home, in my family of origin. And that's the only model that I had for my marriage. So I developed unhealthy coping skills when it was surrounding conflict resolution. So I'm asking you guys to pause and think about what your models for conflict resolution were in your childhood. So Jer mentioned that he let me know that I was creating a yes man. And what this did for me was to bring some self-awareness in, some much needed self-awareness, because I knew I didn't want a yes man.
And I would not survive a marriage as a yes man.
No, because while Jer is very kind, never mistake kindness for weakness. He's a very strong person, and he would not survive a marriage where he had to be a yes man. But one of the tools that I used was threats. So I'm not sure that we're in the right relationship. Maybe we're not meant for each other. You know what? If we can't resolve this, then this clearly isn't going to work. And one day we sat down and decided to take the D word off the table. Why mention divorce? And hopefully you guys have moved past that. But I think it's wise to bring some awareness to the fact that when you threaten like that, when you threaten divorce, when you threaten leaving, first of all, if you're not going to do it, don't threaten it. And second of all, it creates this unhealthy pattern between the two of you. It creates a cycle. And it's not the cycle you want to be in. You want to be in a cycle of growth together, collectively.
It felt like it stunted our progress when we would have that.
For sure.
Yeah. And I chose you because you're my best friend. So I obviously want to make this work. So by taking it off the table, it lets you make it work.
Yeah,
A lot
you're
easier.
forced to make it work, especially if everything else is good. It's much easier to make it work. But it requires you to sit in it. It requires you to look within. It requires you to create some change so that you can grow together instead of throwing the D word around. So let's talk about what a mindful marriage looks like. Conscious couples know that we all have wounds from the past, and they understand that these wounds will inevitably be triggered, especially in your closest relationship. So most of us still believe that relationships should only feel good. And when bad feelings surface, something's gone terribly wrong, right? And we start to argue because I'm having some bad feelings. We don't accept that this is natural in a close relationship. And what we fail to see in this situation is that these bad feelings stem from our own faulty patterning usually. And these issues aren't caused by something outside of us. They're not caused by our partners. They're caused by our own beliefs usually. Conscious couples are willing to look at their past and their current issues in relationships because they know that by facing these belief systems, they can evolve into a new relationship reality, a much more awake, conscious, present reality for them. Dysfunctional patterns will dissolve, but only when we take responsibility for them first. So, as always, what I like to talk about is self-awareness, accountability, and empathy. So here's what the self-awareness part looks like. Jer saying you're creating a yes man made me think, okay, do I see a pattern at all? And I did. In my past relationships, sucked to realize that. And the next piece of that was accountability. So that just required me to own my own words, own my feelings, and own that my feelings and my thoughts and my behaviors had nothing to do with the other person. It had to do with me, and it had to do with my story. The next step is empathy. Empathy looks like this in this case. It is absolutely valid that my conflict resolution skills came from the only models that I had in relationship. That doesn't give me an excuse, that gives me an explanation of who I was and why. Then it's up to me to create the change that's needed. That requires me to be mindful of my feelings during the argument, which is super hard because you're livid at the time. So you got to bring emotion out of it, bring rational thinking into it so that you're operating out of wise mind. And it's important to be curious about the root of your feelings during it, but only as they apply to what I have power over. And it's important for your partner to have empathy during that as well.
Right. I mean, likewise, I grew up with a whole set of confrontation skills that I worked from. Doesn't mean they were good ones. And the hard part for me was being accountable for the empathy I needed to have, because I'm not an empathetic person. It just did not come naturally to me. So I would fight back, but I wasn't trying to understand the other person either. So although she was attacking me, I wasn't trying to understand the reason for that. I just was pushing back.
Yeah. Relationships involve ego so much. So you have to get out of that place of ego, and it's so not easy. So what I'm going to ask you guys to do to cultivate this is a mindful sitting practice. I've mentioned it in some of my other videos. Form a mindful sitting practice every day. It's the best way to create a more quiet mind so that you can get to the root of what your own reality is. It's necessary to pause and go beyond the words to what the other person might be feeling. What might be driving this argument? Anger is a secondary emotion. So get to what could be underneath the anger that you're seeing. That's just the behavior that you're seeing. You care about this person's feelings. You're spending your life with this person. So pause or take a time out if needed. There's nothing to be gained by letting words come out of your mouth that might create an inner wound from your best friend, your partner in life. So I'm going to ask you guys this week to create a practice of pausing when you are triggered by your partner instead of coming right back at them. Instead, create a pause. And during that pause, take a deep breath and use that pause wisely. Notice your thoughts and be curious of the roots during that moment. I want to provide a resource for you guys. One of my favorite authors is Dr. Marshall Rosenberg, and he has a series of books about nonviolent communication. His website is www.nonviolentcommunication.com, and I will include the link right here on our Mindful Marriage series. Thanks so much, you guys. I'm glad that you get to meet Jeremiah and hear his side a little bit, and we will see you next time on Get Grounded.